The end goal is to provide ownership. You're going to have a better, cleaner looking park and more pride in ownership if they own it, either through rent to own or just buy it straight out.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, Freedom Point Podcast listeners, welcome back again to another episode of the Freedom Point. Thank you again so much for being with us on another episode here today. Again, really appreciate the positive feedback for those of you that are out there listening. Appreciate you jumping into each of these episodes. It's my goal to provide you a tremendous amount of value with each episode. And today we have a very unique discussion to have related to the mobile home park investing community, so to speak. I have Carin and Mike. Carin and Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thrilled to be here, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll give you a little bit of a bio. Carin Skowronsky serves as the CIRO, okay? We're going to go with the Chief Investor Relations Officer. She contributes to the brand's rapid growth with her expertise in investor management, sales, marketing. And Mike Samson serves as the Chief Operating Officer. He spearheads day-to-day operations, identifies strong investment opportunities, and expertly manages the parks that they're invested in. So without further ado, guys, maybe you guys can unpack for our listening audience a little bit more about, maybe your own personal investing journey, what got you into mobile home parks in the first place, why that asset class as opposed to where everybody seems to invest their money these days, and that's in the multifamily space.
Absolutely. So I'll dive in
Ladies
there, Mike.
First, yeah, dive in.
I think ultimately as I started my investing journey, I wanted to get out of traditional, right? And I wanted to look at other avenues that maybe yielded a bigger return. Win big, play big is my motto. And so Mike and I crossed paths many years ago in our professional careers here. And he was just telling me about all the mobile home park syndications he had done. I was like, this is really fascinating. My awareness at the time was really focused on stock market and, checking savings and all these traditional pathways. And I'm like, I know people are out there doing more. Why can't I play in the space? So Mike and I sat down and, he walked me through why the value in these spaces and how it continues to grow. And I'll let him talk on that in a minute and expand on it. But there's just some of these really niche overlooked arenas that people go, wow, once you explain to them, they go, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, for me, if you remember when the housing market crashed and we sat there and watched our 401k dwindle and day after day after day, lose half its value. I had a partner his name's Rudy Curler. He's a partner of ours now. Talked to me about wanting to get in and potentially invest in a franchise, put our money other places. We talked about real estate at the time. And I was scared. Fear kept me out of it. And then fast forward another 5-7 years, he asked me again, and he didn't even finish the sentence. And I said, yes, I'm in, whatever you want to do. And, we studied potentially, going down the franchise road at the time. We studied real estate. He's in a variety of different real estate investments. And ultimately, we settled on affordable housing because at the end of the day, when you start looking at different asset classes, you can track over history. Mobile home parks or affordable housing has done incredibly well. That's what led me down that road is, I made the mistake of saying no before. I wasn't really seeing the returns I liked, in the market. And we just jumped and dove headfirst into the affordable housing area.
Yeah, I appreciate that background. The question here is for Mike. So, you mentioned the word syndication, and I don't want to just assume that everybody listening to this episode knows what syndication means. Okay. We know that you can syndicate all kinds of different assets within the real estate community, whether that be multifamily, assisted living, retail, flex office, RV parks. I had a gentleman on the podcast a month ago. They syndicate laundromats, right? So there's all kinds of different things that can be syndicated. So maybe if you could unpack for the listening audience a little bit more about what does syndication mean, and for the person that's interested in investing through a syndication, how would they typically get involved?
Sure. Well, putting it very simply, we had to figure out, okay, how do we go buy $1 million, $2 million, $3 million property when we don't really have the capital to do that amongst ourselves, right? So, we had heard stories of, people doing it with other people's money. And we literally dove into YouTube and just started researching, what does this mean? And then we started learning about the word syndication. I'll tell you, for those people that are out trying to understand this for the first time, Peter Harris does an excellent series on YouTube on a variety of different classes that you can look at, but all around syndications. And we started understanding what it meant. And you start hearing terms of general partner, limited partner. But ultimately, what a syndication is you're finding a group of people that want to passively invest, and they know, like, and trust you, right? Whatever property you're going to syndicate or raise money for, or whatever business you want to raise money for, you're putting a business case in front of them to say, hey, here's what we have. If we accomplish this business model, we project X amount of return, and you're going to get a chunk of that as a limited partner. We're going to take a chunk of that as a general partner, and let's go do this, right? So we learned very quickly as we dove into those, different research areas we went into. There is a way where you can go find people that want to invest in real estate. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy, or they don't have the know-how, and they're willing to put their money into you if you do have the time, energy, and know-how. And that's how we first got started. And I will tell you, Jeremy, our first one, it was friends and family, which I suspect, I see you smiling. Your first syndication was probably friends and family. The hump we had to get over, or the hurdle we had to get over, is feeling awkward talking to friends and family about raising money. Mm-hmm. And again, Peter helped us with that as we were watching his webinars. Who better to take care of friends and family money than somebody like me? There's no money manager that's going to protect, my family's money better than me, or my friend's money better than me. So that's really what we accomplished. Is we bought a mobile home park in Brookings, South Dakota, with about 12 investors, and very simply, we took their money. They were limited partners, completely passive. We were the general partners, which means we're the operators, and we went to work getting them a return on that investment.
That's great. Carin, you had mentioned I think you had stated that there's an opportunity for bigger returns with investing in mobile home park communities. Does that opportunity for bigger outsized returns mean that it's also a bigger risk as it relates to some of the other investment asset class opportunities?
Not necessarily. I think really at the forefront, coming back to Mike's point, it's who is operating it, and you're putting your faith and trust in them, whether you're investing $50K or $250,000 or $500K. And I think, the risk is big risk, big reward, I guess is what I was saying earlier. And if we really boil that down, what room is there to grow in the investment, right? So how much value can we add to a mobile home park to provide a greater return than maybe something that only has a couple nips and tucks, so there's more room to play there, and longevity over time. You can certainly grow that yield. So
Carin, are the mobile home park investment opportunities that you guys are involved with, are these typically, your value add type purchases where you're acquiring assets from mom and pop sellers, or are these, ground up new mobile home park communities? What's the typical kind of cadence or type of play that you guys look to go after? And maybe the question is more geared and tailored towards Mike.
Well, probably both of us. I mean, really, we want to come in and add some value to the community, and we're talking both the mobile home park community and the surrounding community too. a lot of the mobile home parks that we have in our portfolio, here's a good example. We've got projects being done, water lines in the area, and people are looking to have housing, when they're stationed in a certain area for a year or two. So, we can provide value to the community and help them grow and flourish there. But within the park itself, a good example of that is we put in laundry in one of them that previously didn't have one. So when you can add these different value add pieces, you can justify sometimes greater rent or in turn over time, bigger returns for those items.
Sure. And how about you, Mike?
Well, I was just going to say, I'll echo exactly what Carin said. We specifically, to answer your question, are looking for value add parks. That's what gets our investors the return. So there's a sweet spot we like to play in. In mobile home parks, we use the term pads. So it's just a pad equals a mobile home. So somewhere between 100 and 150 total pads at that park is really a good play for us. We typically don't get involved if it's less than 75 anymore. But of those 100 pads, 60 of them could be empty, right? Like we have a massive infill opportunity. And generally speaking, you mentioned mom and pop, they don't have the capital to go spend 70 grand on a new mobile home and, bring it in and get it set up. So that's where our syndication comes in play. We'll raise the capital for all the new home purchases, all the setup. We love the word deferred maintenance. Carin was referencing a water line. So in these old mobile home parks, it's pretty typical where those water lines will be leaking, and we can come in and within a couple of 3-4 weeks, rip out the water line, put in a new one, and completely add value to the park. So love value add, and I'll tell you, it's not only for the investors, but it's for the tenants, right? So we want people to be proud to live in our park. So, it's basic things like changing out a mailbox, right? So the mailboxes are locked, bringing in landscaping, making sure you have snow removal, making sure you're mowing and weed eating and things like that. So we do a lot of deferred maintenance and try to bring the pride back into the mobile home park community we live in.
When it comes to the tenants, are these rent to own type opportunities for them, or is it always just a rental play?
All the above. So typically when we buy a park, because it's a value add, we probably have more park owned homes. And then of course we're bringing in new homes. So, usually that first couple of years when you bring in a brand new home, you probably rent it most of the time. And then when you have your first turn, and the first tenant's out, the second tenant's in, generally then you'll look to sell it either in a rent to own or just sell it outright. But the end goal is to provide ownership. You're going to have a better, cleaner looking park and more pride in ownership if they own it, either through rent to own or just buy it straight out. And then of course, again, we buy them to sell them. So when you're looking 3, 4, 5 years down the road and selling it, that next buyer is going to want more tenant-owned homes. So by the end of the day, when we get our business model fully executed, we want to have 80-90% of those homes tenant-owned by the time we're ready to put it on the market.
Let's unpack that a little bit more, and that's the if you could elaborate maybe more on the exit strategy, right? Because you had mentioned obviously these aren't investments that you hope to hold indefinitely, but rather there's a value add element to coming in, repurposing or repositioning the asset with the goal of ultimately exiting, from that investment. So can you explain a little bit more how, the types of things you do outside of maybe some of the things that you've shared with us today so far, on how you really help to maximize those investor returns?
Sure. When we first syndicate or underwrite a property, we want to see somewhere between a 5 to 7 year exit strategy. So, if you were coming in on one of our syndications, you would know up front, somewhere between year 5 and 7. And we always reserve the right to move quicker if the interest rates or the cap rates, dictate it. Goal number 1 is to get all of the deferred maintenance done. So get all the tradespeople to show up, get the water lines, the landscaping, if you need electrical boxes in, get it taken care of. So our tenants can see us putting energy and effort into their park. And then we get to work on infill. So usually, the first year in that example where we have 30 or 40 empty pads, you can't bring 30 or 40 mobile homes in, 1 year. So we probably stagger it, 10 at a time, just to kind of feel the demand. And our first goal is to refi the park. Actually, Jeremy, is if we can get that sitting in a position where, 6 months to a year into owning the park, we can refi it. Now we've just given all the investors back their initial investment. But the way we do things, they're still owners. We don't refi and buy them out. We refi, get their money back, and then they're getting mailbox money, free and clear until we get to a point where we want to liquidate it. And that's the play. It's usually we'll do an annual rent raise to make sure we're at market. We really want to be careful around rent raise. Normally these parks we're buying are a couple $100 under market rate. And you don't want to take them straight to market rate day one, at least in our opinion, right? We want to be, somewhat humane about it and gradually ease the tenants towards that market rate. But we'll knock out the deferred maintenance, get a big round of infill in, maybe one rent raise. Hopefully we can refi it, and then just keep infilling until we get to a point where we feel like we can get the cap rate return. And like I said, worst case scenario, it's in that 5 to 7 years. Could be sooner, but that's roughly what we want to do. And the last thing I'll tell you in terms of our strategy, we like to build a portfolio. You're going to have a better return if I can sell 500 pads or 1,000 pads than, selling 75 or 100. It's just a different buyer or buying group, quite frankly. So we'll center around a city. As an example, Brookings, South Dakota is our hub. We have 6 mobile home park communities around Brookings. One manager can manage them all, and it just makes it to be a more attractive purchase, for more of a bigger group to get that bigger return.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. I'm glad that you brought that up, and that's as it relates to property management. So there's the management of the assets. That's kind of one leg of the stool. The other one is the building contractors, the reposition efforts, right? Those people that are brought in, to execute that value add component, right? So with Sawgrass, is that more of a vertical integration from a property management and building construction perspective, or are these third parties, that you guys are hiring, these services out to?
That's a really good question. In the Sawgrass plan, soon to be vertical integrated. But we all started this as a side hustle to start, and we're all kind of gradually, moving into a more full-time position over time. So we're using third party now. And typically when we go into a community, either me or our park manager will identify the trades, interview the folks that need to come in and do the work. We do have a partner who helps with that in South Dakota. So he really does a nice job, taking a lot of that off our plate. But even though he or I are responsible for it, it's third party right now. And bucket list, checklist is we get that vertically integrated over time.
Sure. Now, I know I've said this before, and it's going to sound cliche to my audience, but birds fly, fish swim, real estate falls apart. So what is Sawgrass doing? What does Sawgrass do to help kind of mitigate, some of the risks and, mitigate against some of the, basically the downside protection is kind of the main question, as an investor, myself in, more than 24, real estate syndications, my big question to the sponsor is always, how are you mitigating against some of that risk that exists? Because in real estate, stuff is always happening and stuff is always going wrong.
Yeah, I'll take a swing at that because I have a couple different answers for you. I think the first is really good transparency on your underwriting. And typically what syndicators talk about is the returns you're going to offer the investors and like how you're structuring the syndication. We like to spend as much time or more on our pro forma, the underwriting, and just our, that hypothesis around why we are at where we're at, what we're thinking around the business model. We're uber conservative, and we share that with our team. And when we do our capital raise, we want to be as transparent. And I'm not going to say scare them away from investing, but here are the risks, right? Hey, a tornado is a risk, right? Here's how we're mitigating it. Here's the insurance we have. but acts of nature, acts of God are a risk. So we're very transparent around, hey, make sure you understand. And then we set a minimum at 50,000 with our investors. What we don't want to have happen is somebody, put their last 25,000 or scrape up their last 10,000, and then they need it in 6 months because something happened. So we want to make sure it's, passive income that folks can invest. And the other side of this is in what we look for in the park. Like, there's things you can't change. I can't change the population. I can't change the population DMA that they pull from. So we need to, it could be the best park in the world, but if you don't have a great population base, there's not much you can do with it. We'll look at industry around. You don't want one property completely fed by one industry. And I'll use the oil, industry kind of out in North Dakota. Mobile home parks were popping up like crazy, and they needed them, right? Well, what happens if that industry goes away and all of a sudden your park's empty? That's something we really keep an eye on, is what industry around the area is feeding it. And we share that with our investors. So I think the more work we do around the underwriting, and then the more transparent we are with how we're trying to mitigate those risks, gives the investor the confidence to decide if they want to come in or not.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for unpacking that. Carin, I want to pull you into a couple of questions here. We'll let Mike rest his voice there for the end. So my question for you, Carin, is how do you typically structure the syndications between the general partner and the limited partner? Is there a preferred return that's, cumulative? What's kind of that investor split look like? Once that cumulative preferred return has been met. And then my second part to that question is, the big one that a lot of people like is the tax benefits. And I would presume that the land itself is not, depreciable, but the actual units themselves, are. And what does that look like?
Yeah. And Mike's probably going to we're probably going to go back and forth on this one a little bit, but generally we structure our syndications with a preferred return. We want to make sure that we're fair in the investment and how we're structuring it. And we also, it can be looked at as a minimal risk too, when somebody is, feeling like they are getting value out of the way that the deal is structured. And I think that also, especially for first-time investors, right, helps people get comfortable in what they'll be achieving through this investment.
So we've done them, Jeremy, a lot of different ways. We've done 10% preferred return. We've done 8% preferred return. Ironically, and I learned this from a syndicator named Jefferson Lilly. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he's taught me a ton just by listening to his webinars and podcasts. Just a straight cash flow split. So, in syndications, one thing you got to watch out for is what are the fees, right? There's asset management fees, syndication fees, all kinds of different kind of fees you can get hit with. And what he taught us through his material was just a straight 50-50 or 60-40 cash flow split on the property. He makes money, investors make money, vice versa. That's actually becoming our most popular from the investors is, let's go down this road together. So, as Carin mentioned, we started early, heavy on preferred return. Some of the most popular ones we're doing right now are just a straight cash flow split. And that's a cash flow split on the monthly cash flow and on the equity on the when we sell it, right? The liquidating event.
Yeah, that's great that you guys show an alignment of interest between the operators and the limited partners that are partnering with you on the investment.
Yeah, and you are absolutely correct. There is a very tasty tax benefit on this. And at some of the time, you can get a tax write-off or a tax benefit. And I think it's called segregation or segregating. Just on like the utilities in there in the ground that you can get accelerated depreciation or accelerated write-off on. Usually for us, the first couple of years, it's a pass through to the investors because we're infilling, right? We're showing a paper loss on it. And then once you get into year 3 or 4, it's when they start turning pretty cash flow positive and the write-offs are more limited. But ironically, that's also when our investors are ready to get into their next syndication, right?
Yep.
So anyway,
No, good.
hopefully that answered your question.
No, it's great, and I really appreciate that. It absolutely did. So my next question is we're sitting in November of 2023 right now. Why would you say that mobile home park investing is a good opportunity at this point in history as it relates to maybe other asset classes?
Yeah, I mean, really, if we look at what's happening in the economy, we're in a housing crisis. People are getting priced out in markets. People are moving further out to the suburbs, to rural areas to be able to afford housing. And for some, that means into a mobile home park or a relocation as such. And, we really want to make sure that we do what we do well for those folks. And, as we mentioned earlier, provide the value. But there's just a little bit of nourishing that needs to be taken into that space.
It's affordable housing. If you're looking for, the answer that I would give you, if you go look at different asset classes over time, light industrial parks have always done well. You start looking at self-storage, done well, and you look at mobile home parks, have done well. Yep. And there's always going to be a need for affordable housing. Especially when you have developers that actually put the tender loving care into the park and try to give it its best face forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your kind of overall approach to communication, with investors? Is it a monthly cadence? Is it a quarterly cadence? How transparent generally are you with those communications?
In our first year of an investment, we really focus on a monthly update, and we do that by video, and we walk people through the numbers, sometimes photos. It's a combination of what is happening real time with their money, right? They always love that. And so first year monthly, second year onward, it's quarterly, right? Because now things are up and running. There's less maybe to share often. And so it's really more focused on the numbers and the return at that point based on our projections. So keeping them apprised after that first year but still at a high touch point. And of course, we're always here when they have questions for us.
Sure. What's the next, thing on your, goal list or bucket list for Sawgrass Capital? Where would you like to see the company, in 3 to 5 years from now?
Ladies first.
I was gonna point at you. I don't know. I mean, I have big dreams. I'm one of those #dream bigger people, but I would say, we would love to do a really grandiose, capital raise, $10 million or so, really buy something big, have a lot of investors, both combination of present investors reinvesting their capital and also new ones, right? Because as we continue to expand our team, that allows us to move more nimbly, evaluate more parks, do more outreach. Because if there's one thing that I think I've learned as a newer part of the Sawgrass team is everyone's going, how do I get in on this? Talk to me more about it. I've seen what you're doing. It's piqued my interest. And I think with more education, there's more people out there than I think we anticipated having interest in one of these untraditional spaces.
Let's talk about that for just a minute. What would be maybe 1 or 2 educational resources or places that you would point that new investor, maybe that investor that's not diversified outside of Wall Street, right? They've never invested into real estate, any asset class before. They want to get started. They know that they don't want to go buy grandma's home down the road, fix and flip it, right? They just want to do it passively. They don't want to have to deal with tenants, trash, toilets, and termites, right? What types of educational resources would you give that type of investor that might be listening to this episode?
Well, first, I would go to Sawgrass Capital Partners and take a look. And we got some fantastic content on there that Carin is responsible to drive. But I'll give you 2. And I mentioned this name prior. Peter Harris. He's with a company called CPA, which is Commercial Property Advisors, and just YouTube him. It's I'm not going to say investors for dummies, but it's so simple. He does a phenomenal job of educating his listeners on how to do syndications, how to do real estate. So I'd go there. And then I learned a ton. I've never met the man, but I sing his praises, Jefferson Lilly, at Park Avenue Partners. I learned a ton about mobile home park syndications and just ways that he does it that fits how we do it, and just kind of a similar mindset. So all you gotta do is go to the website, and you can listen to some of his webinars or webcasts. That's where I'd point you.
Well, I really appreciate you guys joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having us. This was super fun, and we hope everybody, of course, learned a lot.
I can't believe it's over already.
I know, time flies.
Time flies. No, I had a blast. I appreciate you letting us on to share our story.
Of course, and I'd be doing my listening audience and you a disservice if I didn't ask you how my audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to.
Sure. You can find us on both Facebook and LinkedIn at Sawgrass Capital Partners, or you can reach out to either one of us directly, of course, on either one of those channels.
Great. Well, Carin and Mike, again, thank you so much for joining us today. And to my listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point podcast. Look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.